Welcome everyone. Today we are diving into a fascinating corner of 18th century philosophy, a period where the very nature of existence and reality was hotly debated. We'll explore two towering figures, Leibniz, the great rationalist, and Hume, the influential empiricist. Our goal is to understand their contrasting ideas through the lens of what we call an inner ontology, or the distinction between inner being and outer phenomena. Let's start with Leibniz. Leibniz's philosophy is built on the idea of monads, which you can think of as tiny, indivisible centers of reality, almost like cosmic pixels of existence. Each monad is complete in itself, containing a kind of inner perfection. In other words, reality in Leibniz's view is structured from within. The inner world matters most. It is the source of order, causality, and the harmony of the universe. Even when we see changes in the outside world, according to Leibniz, they are expressions of the pre-established perfection of these inner monads. Now, contrast with this with Hume, the empiricist. Hume's philosophy turns our attention onward. He argues that all we can know are impressions and ideas, the raw experiences and sensations that come to us from the external world. There is no guaranteed inner substance, no enduring self that exists independently. Instead, the mind is like a theater where different sensory impressions appear and interact. Cause and effect for Hume is a habit and pattern, not an intrinsic necessity embedded in the universe. In this view, reality is largely shaped by what appears to us rather than what is inside the world itself. Ontology, while the study of existence itself, has roots that go all the way back to Aristotle's first philosophy. Yet, it was only in the early modern period with Christian Wolff that ontology was systematized as a full-fledged framework for metaphysics. In the 17th century, philosophers were deeply concerned with the idea of substance, that ultimate foundation upon which everything else depends. For Leibniz, substance was not just a matter or an external object. He conceived of it as a monad, a non-composite, non-material, self-contained unit of inner order. Think of it like a perfectly designed cosmic seed, containing within in the entire pattern of its existence and relations. In this way, Leibniz's philosophy extends the rationalist tradition of Descartes and Spinoza, emphasizing an internal, immanent structure as the true foundation of reality. Enter Hume, however, and the very idea of substance undergoes a radical critique. Hume argues that the notion of substance as something beyond a collection of observable properties is unfounded. We never directly experience our substance itself. All we encounter are perceptions, impressions, and ideas in our mind. The focus of ontology then shifts from some ultimate metaphysical bedrock to the realm of what humans actually perceive and experience, both internally and externally. In simpler terms, imagine Leibniz's universe as a perfectly constructed machine. Each cog is self-contained, precise, and follows an internal logic. Hume's perspective, by contrast, is like observing a kaleidoscope of patterns. We see shifting arrangements and colors, but there is no fixed central piece holding it all together. One emphasizes inner order, the other outer experience. This stark contrast between Leibniz's maximized internal order and Hume's denial of underlying substance forms the foundation of what we call we can call the inner ontology of an early modern philosophy. It is from this tension between the inward, structured reality and the outward, perceptual world that the fundamental debates of the 18th century emerge. Notably, this debate also sets the stage for Immanuel Kant, who famously described it as the philosophical wake-up call from the dogmatic slumber of his predecessors. The clash between ultimate substance and the perceptual flow forced Kant to rethink the foundation of knowledge and reality. In short, the early modern discussion on substance is not just a historical curiosity. It is the origin of the inner distinction, the first explicit acknowledgement in philosophy that reality can be approached from the inner structural perspective or the outer experiential perspective, and that these approaches can fundamentally diverge. Let's explore Levinas's radical internalism, one of the most intriguing aspects of his philosophy. At the heart of his ontology are monads, indivisible, non-material substances that make up the universe. You can think of monads as tiny, soul-like entities, each containing within itself a full spectrum of existence. Unlike ordinary physical objects, monads have no windows. Nothing enters or leaves them. They are completely self-contained. This idea may seem abstract, so here's an analogy. Imagine each monad as a self-contained universe in miniature. Everything that happens to that universe, past, present, and future, is encoded inside it. Nothing from outside can change it. Its dynamics are entirely internal. This is what we mean by Levinas's radical internalism. Reality, in his view, is not something imposed from the outside. It emerged from the intrinsic structure of each monad. Supporting this idea is the predicate in notion principle, often abbreviated as PIN. Levinas explained this in a letter to Arnauld. For every true affirmative proposition, whether necessary or contingent, universal or particular, the predicate is somehow contained in the concept of the subject. In simpler terms, this principle says that everything a monad could ever do or be is already contained within it. Each monad's concept, what Levinas calls its necessity or thisness, already includes all its possible states and properties. The monad does not gain attributes from the external world. Instead, it manifests internally what is already encoded in its own essence. Think of it like a pre-programmed movie inside each monad. Every scene, every twist, every outcome is already written into its internal script. The universe unfolds as monads reveal their inner dynamics in harmony with each other, without any external interference. This is the extreme form of internalism. All causal and structural power comes from within, not from outside. In this way, Levinas's monads form a universe that is perfectly ordered from the inside out. Their inner completeness makes them the ultimate building blocks of reality. Windowless yet profoundly dynamic, each containing the blueprint of existence itself. Let's move deeper into Levinas's monads. Unlike ordinary objects, monads are not static substances. They are dynamic, living centers of activity. A monad is distinguished from others only by the changes in its internal states. These internal states are made up of two fundamental components, possessions and appetitions. So what are these? Possessions are the internal representations of the external world. You can think of them as the monad's own inner images of what is happening outside. But possessions alone do not create movement or change. That's where appetitions come in. They are the monad's internal impulses or tendencies that drive it from one possession to the next. In other words, repetitions are what propel the monad's internal life forward, connecting the snapshots of possession into a continuous dynamic flow. To help visualize this, imagine a tiny universe inside each monad, constantly watching, sensing, and responding. The perceptions are the scenes it observes, and the repetitions are the inner forces, nudging it to move to the next scene. Together, they make the monad a self-contained dynamic agent, not just a passive point of existence. This inner dynamism also leads us to interpret monads through what some scholars call post-ontology. Here, monads are understood as active metaphysical forces, not merely passive building blocks. Their repetitions are expressions of this fundamental force, the very essence that structures reality. From this perspective, the universe is built not from inert matter, but from living, active centers of force, each unfolding its inner life according to its own tendencies. In short, each monad is a dynamic world unto itself, continuously manifesting its inner potential. Perceptions allow it to reflect the outer world, while repetitions push it forward, driving the inner rhythm of existence. This is what makes Levinas's monads living forces at the heart of a deeply ordered universe, windowless yet full of motion and activity. One of Levinas's most striking ideas is that monads had no windows. But what does this mean? Simply put, a monad cannot be influenced or changed by anything outside itself. There is no door, no channel, no interaction with the external world. All change, all development within a monad arises entirely from its internal principles. The perceptions it holds and the repetitions that drive its transition from one state to another. Imagine a tiny self-contained universe. Nothing from the outside can enter, and nothing from inside can escape. Everything that happens within this universe is determined by its own internal logic. This is what Levinas means by a windowless substance, a reality that is completely self-determined. When we combine this idea with the predicate in notion principle, we see something even more remarkable, because every monad contains within its concept all its possible properties and states. Its internal dynamics are not just psychological or experiential. They are logically and metaphysically necessary. In other words, each monad's inner life unfolds according to the built-in rational necessity, independent of any external cause. Even notions like time and space take on a new meaning here. At the deepest level, a monad is timeless, and spatial relations emerge only as a product of interactions among monads, not as inherent features of the monads themselves. Reality in Levinas's vision is thus constructed from self-contained, internally governed centers of existence, whose inner logic completely shapes the external phenomena we perceive. To give a simple analogy, imagine a perfectly coded video game that runs entirely offline. Every character, every event, every change in the game world is determined by the internal code of the game itself. Nothing from outside can alter it. In the same way, monads unfold their entire reality from their own internal principles, forming a universe of radical internalism, the most extreme form of rationalist internalism in early modern philosophy. In this system, the inner, logically necessary order precedes and governs all outer appearances, showing us a universe that is perfectly structured from within, windowless, autonomous, and metaphysically self-sufficient. Now let's turn to the external world in Levinas's philosophy. While Monads form the true foundation of reality. The material objects, space, time, and interactions that we experience in daily life belong, in a sense, to the realm of phenomena. But these are not mere illusions, like dreams or hallucinations. Levinas called them well-founded phenomena, or because they are grounded in the internal state of monads. In other words, the external world appears structured and consistent because it faithfully reflects the inner order of monads. Think of it as a projection of a perfectly coded internal universe, while the objects themselves, a table, a tree, or a beam of wood, are not ultimate substances. They consistently correspond to the inner dynamics of the monads. For example, consider the statement: two sticks are the same length. That equality does not exist independently out there in space. Rather, it is a reflection of the entire rationalness or mental relational aspect that arise from monads' internal state. The apparent objectivity of the external world does not come from the things themselves, having independent reality. Instead, it arises from the transcendent harmony of monads in inner orders, perfectly aligning to produce the phenomena we perceive. This is a crucial distinction. Unlike Berkeley, who argued that objects exist only in perception, Levinas maintains that external phenomena are objectively grounded. They are not mere mental projections. Their regularity and consistency are anchored in the actual internal order of monads, making them well-founded and reliable, even if they are not the ultimate reality themselves. So, the external world is like a perfectly synchronized orchestra. Each monad is a musician following its own internal score. The sound we hear, the harmony, the melody, are the external phenomenon, beautifully aligned, yet ultimately dependent on the inner life of each player. The world we experience is thus extrinsic but deeply grounded, a mirror of the inner, windowless order of reality. Here, we encounter one of the most famous and fascinating aspects of Levinas's philosophy: the problem of interaction between monads. Remember, monads have no windows. This means that no monad can directly influence another. They are completely self-contained. As a result, true interaction, even between mind and body, strictly speaking, does not exist. If monads cannot affect each other, then how do we account for the apparent order and interaction we observe in the external world? Levinas's solution is his theory of pre-established harmony. The idea is elegant and surprising. God, when creating the universe, programmed all monads from the beginning so that their internal changes would perfectly align with one another. The result is that while it seems as if one monad causes changes in another, in reality, each monad is simply following its own internally determined sequence, perfectly synchronized with all others. Think of it like two perfectly synchronized clocks. Even though the hands move in harmony, one clock's motion does not cause the other to move. Each follows its own internal mechanism, yet they remain in perfect temporal alignment. Similarly, when you observe a billiard ball striking another and causing it to move, this causal appearance is the external expression of the pre-established internal state of the monads involved, not a direct causal influence. In short, pre-established harmony allows Levinas to explain the order, regularity, and apparent interaction of the external world without violating the windowless, self-contained nature of monads. The universe appears causally interconnected, yet at its foundation, It is composed of independent, internally driven forces perfectly harmonized by God's initial design. This concept not only resolves the problem of causal interaction among monads, but also reinforces Leibniz's vision of a universe that is deeply ordered from within, where external phenomena reflect the harmonious unfolding of inner monadic life. Leibniz's philosophy embodies a form of radical reductionism when it comes to the external world. Although we experience material objects, bodies, and causal interactions, Leibniz denies that these external phenomena have ultimate independent reality. Instead, he reduces them to expressions of God's perfect logical plan, grounded in the predicate in notion principle and the pre-established harmony. In other words, what we perceive as the external world, with its causality, movement, and interactions, is ultimately a well-ordered projection of the inner life of monads, fully controlled by divine rationality. This ensures rational objectivity, even though the apparent reality of objects is not independent. Consider it like a highly detailed simulation. The objects, the events, the apparent interactions all follow perfectly from the underlying rules coded into the system. The simulation feels real to its inhabitants, but its order and coherence are guaranteed entirely by the internal logic of the code. While in Leibniz's case, the internal logic of monads and God's overarching plan. In this framework, the internal reality of monads takes absolute precedence. The external world is merely their well-founded projection. The windowless nature of monads creates a kind of causal isolation, making the perception of causality itself a phenomenal illusion. Yet, this illusion is perfectly ordered, because God's rational plan synchronizes every monad from the beginning. Thus, the objectivity and coherence of the external world do not rest on the independence of material things themselves. They are sustained entirely by a transcendent immanent principle. God's rational design, making Leibniz's system a radical internalist and rationalist universe, where internal logical necessity dominates all appearances. Now let's turn to David Hume, the great empiricist who radically challenged the assumptions of rationalist metaphysics. At the heart of Hume's philosophy is the idea that the human mind contains only impressions and ideas. Impressions are our direct, vivid experiences, the immediate sensations we feel when we see, hear, or touch something. Ideas, on the other hand, are the faint images or copies of these impressions in our minds. According to Hume's copy principle, every simple idea is derived from a prior impression, and nothing exists in the mind that is not ultimately rooted in experience. Complex ideas, Hume argues, are nothing more than bundles or collections of simple ideas. They do not reveal any hidden substance or independent reality. They are simply patterns of experience tied together. Think of it like a bundle of threads. Each thread is a single impression, and the bundle is what we call a concept, idea, or object. There is no core substance at the center, only the arrangement of threads. This principle acts as a kind of philosophical microscope. By examining ideas carefully and tracing them back to their originating impressions, Hume aims to eliminate confusion and ensure clarity, particularly in areas like moral reasoning. Knowledge for Hume comes entirely from experience. Any idea that cannot be traced back to experience is meaningless or groundless. For example, the idea of a unicorn According to Hume, is a composite of impressions we have experienced separately. The horse-like body, but it has no corresponding impression in reality, so it cannot claim real existence. In sum, Hume's empiricism dissolves the notion of a substantial self or substance. What we take to the self is nothing but a bundle of possessions, fleeting and constantly changing. There is no hidden permanent core, only the ongoing flow of impressions and ideas. This radical empiricist framework stands in sharp contrast to Levinas's rationalist, monad-based universe, offering a vision of reality built entirely from experience, not internal necessity. Now, we explore Hume's radical dismantling of internal substance. Unlike Levinas, who places the indivisible monad at the center of internal reality, Hume applies what is called the bundle theory, effectively deconstructing the notion of substance itself. According to the bundle theory, objects are simply collections of properties, color, shape, size, texture, and the so-called substance that supposedly underlies these properties does not exist. There is no hidden thing that holds the properties together. This idea continues the critique of the notion of a bare particular, which John Locke had also highlighted. The idea that there could be a substance existing independently of any properties is conceptually incoherent. Hume extends this reasoning directly to the self. When we turn inward and examine our minds, we never find a stable, enduring self. Instead, what we observe is a bundle of constantly changing possessions, flowing one after another at a dizzying speed. There is no metaphysical core, no soul-like substance, just a collection of impressions and ideas in continuous motion. To visualize this, imagine a river of experiences. Each possession, a sight, a feeling, a thought, is like a drop in the river. The self is not a rock at the river's center. It is the river itself, the ongoing stream of impressions. Trying to find the permanent self is like trying to catch one drop of water and hold it. The moment you do, it has already changed. In this framework, Hume's internal realm is fundamentally different from Levinas's. For Levinas, monads are internally necessary and self-contained, giving rise to metaphysical order. For Hume, what we call the internal is merely a transient flow of data derived from experience, constantly shifting and lacking any fixed substance. The self is not an eternal, metaphysical monad, but a dynamically changing bundle, just like the objects we perceive in the external world. This view represents one of the most radical challenges to traditional rationalist metaphysics. There is no ultimate internal substance, only the patterns and sequences of perceptions that we experience. One of the most striking consequences of Hume's empiricism is his critique of causality. Hume argues that when we observe the external world, we never actually perceive a necessary connection between events. For example, when we see a billiard ball hit another and the second one moves, we do not observe some invisible force building the two events together. What we do observe is simply a constant conjunction. Event A is always followed by event B. In other words, causation is not something out there in objects themselves. The idea of necessary connection does not exist as an objective property of the world. Instead, it arises in our minds as a habit of or instinct. Repeated experience teaches us to expect certain outcomes, and our mind forms a psychological tendency, an inner impression that B will follow A. Think of it like walking through a familiar path. You have learned through repeated experience that stepping on a certain stone causes the ground to be firm. You do not directly perceive a necessity binding your foot to the ground. You simply form the expectation that this will happen based on habit. Similarly, the mind projects a sense of causal inevitability onto the external sequence of events, but it is fundamentally subjective. Hume's insight transforms causality from a metaphysical law into a naturalized psychological process. Causal reasoning, he argues, is not derived from reason alone, but from instinct and the repeated patterns of experience. This provides a naturalistic solution to the problem of causality. Even in the essence of metaphysical necessity, humans can reliably predict and navigate the world because the mind develops habitual expectations. Thus, in Hume's framework, causation exists not as an external absolute law, but as a mental pattern, a reflection of the mind's adaptation to experience. The external world offers sequences. The mind creates expectation, and together we navigate reality, even without any true metaphysical binding. Finally, we come to Hume's skeptical conclusions about the external world. Hume challenges the assumption that bodies and external objects have a continuous, independent existence that can be rationally justified. From the perspective of the general public, this belief is clearly mistaken. People naturally assume that their possessions are directly of external objects, and that these objects exist even when no one is perceiving them. Hume points out, however, that our possessions are entirely dependent on our senses and nervous system. There is no rational basis for assuming that the things we see, hear, or touch exist independently outside of these possessions. Even the philosophical approach, we posit a dual existence of possession and external object, typical of classical realism, is, according to Hume, unstable and problematic. Philosophers attempt to bridge the gap between inner possessions and outer reality, but Hume argues that this system is a product of unfounded speculation and conceptual confusion. Reason itself cannot provide convincing proof that our possessions correspond to independent external objects. Think of it like this. It's as if you are watching a movie on a screen. You see characters move, act, and interact, and you naturally assume the characters have lives outside the movie theater. But the movie itself gives you no evidence of independent existence beyond the screen. Similarly, Hume asserts, no matter how much reasoning we apply, we cannot bridge the gap between our internal perception and the supposed external reality. The result of this analysis is stark. Hume concludes that philosophical skeptics always have the upper hand. Any attempt to justify the independent existence of the external world ultimately fails. For Hume, our beliefs about external objects are grounded in habit and instinct, not in rational demonstration, leaving us in a state of naturalized skepticism about the reality beyond our own possessions. While Hume is skeptical about our knowledge about the external world, he rejects extreme Pyrrhonian skepticism, which questions all reasoning and would paralyze human thought entirely. Instead, he advocates a form of moderate or academic skepticism, urging careful judgment, humility, and focus on distinguishing abstract reasoning from matters of fact. Even though we cannot rationally prove the existence of the external world, humans cannot simply abandon this belief. Our minds are naturally inclined to assume continuity and order, and our imagination fills in gaps where reason cannot reach. Hume calls this a natural propensity, or psychological tendency to maintain the belief in an external world, even if it is ultimately unprovable. From this perspective, the order and predictability of the external world are not guaranteed by God's absolute necessity, as in Leibniz's system. Instead, they are unstable projections maintained by human habit and psychological mechanisms. In other words, when we experience regularity in nature, the sun rising each day, objects falling when dropped, these are patterns that our mind expects based on repeated experience, not evidence of metaphysical necessity. Think of it like playing a video game. The rules of the game create predictable outcomes, but the order comes from the programming of the system, not from any inherent necessity in the objects themselves. Similarly, the regularity we perceive in the world is maintained by our psychological habits, making it reliable in practice, but ultimately contingent and fallible. In Hume's framework, this approach allows us to function pragmatically in the world, respecting the limitations of reason while acknowledging the fragile and provisional nature of our beliefs about external reality. Moderate skepticism becomes a guiding principle. We proceed cautiously, aware of uncertainty, but not paralyzed by it. When we look at Levinas and Hume through the lens of inner and outer existence, we see a striking difference in what each philosopher considers fundamental. Their divergence begins with opposing views on substance, and this difference shapes how they interpret the external world. Levinas builds his ontology on inner, non-composite, eternal substances known as monads. Each monad is a self-contained, soul-like entity that encompasses all of its properties internally. Think of it as a tiny universe in itself, fully equipped with everything it could ever experience or become. Monads are windowless, meaning they do not receive influences from outside. All changes happen according to their own internal principles. This gives Levinas's philosophy a form of radical internalism. The inner substance is absolute, complete, and self-sufficient. From this perspective, the external world, space, time, matter, is not independent, but a structured and harmonious expression of the monad's inner order. In other words, the universe we perceive is like a perfectly synchronized orchestra. Each monad plays its part according to a pre-established harmony orchestrated by God, giving the appearance of causal interaction without any direct influence between monads. Hume, in contrast, denies the existence of such enduring substances. For him, what we call an object or a self is simply a bundle of perception, a collection of sensory impressions and ideas. There is no underlying bare particular holding these properties together. Our inner self is not a permanent, cohesive entity. It is a fluid, ever-changing flow of perceptions, constantly in motion. Similarly, the external world is not anchored in any metaphysical necessity. Its apparent stability arises from our psychological habits and instincts, formed by repeatedly observing sequences of events. When we expect one event to follow another, this expectation comes not from the world itself, but from the mind's tendency to project order onto its appearance. Causality therefore is interpreted very differently in the two systems. In Leibniz, causality is guaranteed by God's pre-established harmony. The internal logic of each monad unfolds in perfect synchrony with all others, making causal relationships appear objectively real, though they are internally determined. In Hume, causality is subjective. We do not perceive necessary connections between events. We only notice that certain events tend to follow others. The mind then forms a habitual expectation, giving rise to the impression of cause and effect, but this is contingent, fallible, and grounded entirely in experience. In short, Leibniz places substance and internal necessity at the foundation of reality, with the outward as a perfectly ordered projection of his inner monads. Hume, on the other hand, situates the mind and experience at the center, treating both the self and the external world as dynamic, contingent, and psychologically mediated phenomena. This contrast highlights the broader inner ontology. One emphasizes the radical internal order, the other experiences the outer flux, and the difference fundamentally reshapes how we understand existence, perception, and causality. Leibniz's monads are windowless and perfectly self-contained, following the predicate in notion principle. This means that each monad carries its entire narrative internally. Every potential state, every property, past, present, and future is already encoded within it. In other words, a monad does not rely on anything outside itself to define its being. Its inner state, composed of perceptions and appetitions, principally express what we experience as the external world. The monad's internal dynamics are driven by intrinsic force, making it a living, active center of reality, rather than a passive observer. Think of it like a tiny clockwork universe, perfectly complete and self-sustained, where every cog and spring contains the blueprint for the entire system. Hume, by contrast, rejects the idea of a cohesive, independent self. The human self is not a permanent substance, but a continuous flow of perceptions, each arising and fading without any underlying unity. There is no inner monad-like force holding it together. The self is a stream of experiences, largely reflecting the impressions we receive from the external world. Where Leibniz grants monads absolute independence and internal coherence, Hume sees the mind's inner life as phenomenally fluid, shaped, and sustained by the succession of sensory impressions. It is as if the self is a river, never the same water twice, continuously moving and only appearing unified from a distance. In short, Leibniz celebrates complete internal fidelity, where the inner essence contains and organizes everything autonomously. Hume emphasizes non-cohesion and contingency, where the inner life is inseparable from experience and lacks any independent, enduring substance. This contrast highlights a key inner ontological difference. One prioritizes absolute internal order, the other foregrounds dynamic experience and relational flux. The philosophical contrast between Leibniz and Hume becomes most pronounced when we examine causality. Leibniz resolves the problem of cause and effect through internal logical necessity. In his system, there are no real interactions between monads. Each is completely self-contained. So why do we perceive causal connections in the world? Because God has pre-established the harmony among all monads from the very beginning. Each monad's internal states unfold in perfect synchrony with all others, creating the appearance of causality. In other words, cause and effect are not out there in the external world. They are embedded in the very essence of each monad, encoded in its internal properties and in the overall divine plan. You can imagine it like a set of perfectly synchronized watches. Each tick seems to influence the others, but in reality, every watch follows its own pre-programmed rhythm. Hume takes a completely different approach. He argues that causal necessity is not observed in the world itself. When we see one event followed by another repeatedly, we never directly experience a necessary connection, only a constant conjugation. The idea of cause arises from the mind's habit or expectation, built from repeated experience. When you touch a hot stove and feel pain, you learn to expect heat to burn. That expectation is psychological, not metaphysical. It exists within us as an internal impression, rather than as a picture of the world. In Hume's view, causality is contingent and subjective, dependent on our mental patterns and experience, not dictated by any absolute necessity. In essence, Leibniz sees causality as logically necessary, woven into the fabric of reality itself, while Hume sees it as psychologically projected, a product of habit and expectation. This contrast captures the core of their inner ontological divergence. One roots order in internal metaphysical structure, the other in mind-mediated possession of repeated experience. The comparison between Leibniz and Hume reveals a decisive difference in how they prioritize existence itself. Leibniz places internal logical necessity at the center. For him, the order of the external world, what we perceive as causal and structured phenomena, is guaranteed by God's pre-established plan, perfectly reflecting the internal logic of each monad. In essence, reality of objectivity is rescued through internal metaphysical structure. Think of it as a perfectly composed symphony. Each note is pre-written and harmonized, and what we hear is the external manifestation of that internal order. Hume, in contrast, gives priority to external experience and perception. Because our perceptions are incomplete and inconsistent, we never observe necessary connections between events. He concludes that both internal reality and external reality are fundamentally undermined. For him, what we call causality or self exists only as a psychological construct, a pattern our mind imposes on a flux of sensory impressions. In other words, the mind becomes the central internal element, not an eternal metaphysical substance. The critical contrast is this. Leibniz grounds existence internally, in metaphysical substance and divine order, while Hume grounds it psychologically, in the mind's processing of experience. One sees structure and necessity as built into reality itself, the other sees them as emergent from human perception and habit. This difference defines the split between rationalist and empiricist approaches to existence and lays the foundation for subsequent debates in modern philosophy. The contrast between Leibniz and Hume marks one of the most decisive turning points in early modern philosophy. Leibniz aimed to guarantee the order of the external world through the absolute independence of internal substances, the monads, and their logical necessity, a stance often called rationalist dogmatism. Hume, however, exposed the limits of our knowledge about the external world, demonstrating that neither ultimate substances nor necessary causal connections can be rationally established. His critique led to a crisis in modern metaphysics, revealing the fragility of the rationalist system. Immanuel Kant, encountering Hume's skeptical critique of causality, famously said that it awoke him from his dogmatic slumber. Confronted with the extremes of Leibniz's dogmatic metaphysics and Hume's empirical skepticism, Kant sought a middle path. His solution was transcendental idealism. Kant argued that the external world, as we know it, is never the thing in itself, but only appearances, the way things present themselves to us. Universal and necessary concepts such as causality do not derive from the world itself, but arise from the innate structures of human cognition, the pure forms of understanding that shape all experience. In this way, Kant synthesized Leibniz's rationalist insistence on internal necessity with Hume's empiricist attention to experience, grounding the universality of our knowledge of the external world not in metaphysical substances, but in the very structure of the knowing subject. Think of it as the mind acting like a lens. It does not merely record external events, but organizes and interprets them according to its own intrinsic rules, making sense of an otherwise chaotic stream of experience. Through this framework, Kant attempts to reconcile the tension between dogmatism and skepticism, providing a foundation for modern philosophy that both honors reason and acknowledges the limits of empirical observation. The philosophical tension between internal principles and external phenomena, first highlighted by Leibniz and Hume, continues to resonate in modern metaphysics. Even today, debates over epistemology, justification, truth, and human motivation revolve around the distinction between internalism. The idea that justification or reality depends on what is accessible internally to a subject, and externalism, which emphasizes factors beyond the mind or internal perspective. In contemporary meta-ontology, philosophers investigate how the context of language affects meaning. A single statement may convey one truth internally, within a philosophical or theoretical discussion, and a different truth externally. In ordinary, everyday life, this distinction echoes the early modern separation of substance and perception, essence and phenomenon, showing that the internal-external ontology is not a relic, but a living concern. Historically, we can see this divide in early scientific methodology. Roger Bacon, for example, distinguished between internal experience or reflection and external experience, empirical observation. Over time, the external approach becomes dominant, shaping the scientific worldview and illustrating how the internal-external divide influences both epistemology and methodology. Ultimately, Leibniz tried to preserve the order of the external world through internal substances, but in doing so, he risked dogmatic closure. A system so internally perfect that it left no room for contingency and empirical challenge. Hume, on the other hand, dismantled internal substance by emphasizing the limits of external experience, arriving at a skeptical dissolution of certainty. Together, their philosophies mark an ontological watershed. Any metaphysical inquiry in the modern era must ask whether the foundation of ultimate reality lies within or beyond. Here, the inner ontology with a K-Confucian interpretation offers a novel resolution. Drawing on Confucian humanism, it transcends the binary. The Tao, in this framework, is seen as a generative rhythm that harmonizes inward wholeness, Ren, or benevolent internal coherence with outward articulation, Li, or ritualized external order. In this non-dualistic vision, ultimate reality is neither purely internal nor external. Instead, it emerges from the dynamic entanglement of in and out, where inner moral cultivation resonates with the larger cosmic harmony. In practical terms, ethical self-cultivation becomes a microcosm of universal emergence. By linking internal virtue with external order, the K-Confucian IO approach bridges the gap between the internal and external realms, offering a multi-scale generative ontology where human purpose and cosmic dynamics co-rise, avoiding both Levinas's rigid dogmatism and Hume's radical skepticism.